background for people who haven't come to these AMAs before. These are all completely for you to become a better product-led sales leader and understand how folks in the industry and experts in the industry have solved similar problems. So I will give a quick intro to Allison and then dive into some questions and then open it up to all of you. So Allison is currently the founder and GP of the New Normal Fund, and she invests and advises a ton of PLG companies such as Mural and High Touch, Stoolly, Warmly, DBT, and we're really lucky to have her as an investor of focus. She's also on the board of Commvault, which is being one of the youngest public company directors. And really relevant, she's the former COO of Gainsight, where she's really created the category of customer success, and she scaled the business from $1 million in ARR to pre-IPO. And it's there where she created the category of customer success. And now by advising all of these awesome PLG companies, she's really seeing and having a front row seat to the transformation of customer success, which she'll talk about today. And also awesome that she's been recognized as Fortune's most powerful woman and the top 50 people in sales and biz dev. And so Allison's here today to talk about a section that she wrote actually in the product-led sales playbook, which maybe Sandy, you can pop into the chat for people to see, on customer success versus sales assist. And are they actually different roles in a modern PLS approach? So I am pumped for this discussion. I think it's going to be awesome. And welcome, Allison. Maybe we can have you do a little bit of your own background and then I can dive into some questions.
Sure. Thanks, Alexa. That was a really kind introduction. Well, I think some of you have heard on the personal side, I grew up in Philadelphia, live in the Bay Area now, have a daughter who is almost 1 year old. We are like planning a 1-year birthday party with like streamers and balloons and things like that, which we're very excited about. Professionally, Alexa, I think you covered it. I can't remember if you mentioned this. I'm also on the board of DBT, where Bar works actually, which is also really a very distributed company that was, founded in Philadelphia. So have a lot of pride for the hometown there. I've spent a lot of years thinking about customer success, talking to people about customer success, writing about it. I think it's so interesting to see how it's evolving, kind of in fits and starts within a PLG context. I will start by saying that I haven't figured this out, and I'm actually very curious to hear from other folks on the call, what you were doing, but I will share some observations I've had, some maybe ideas, then maybe pose some questions for the group that, things that we need to think through all together and figure out. But, mostly I'm grateful to Alexa for kickstarting this community so that we can all figure this out together.
Amazing. So maybe a good first place to start is it's a broad question, but where do you see CS and PLG companies today? And how does that look different to where it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to note is that customer success has existed in kind of a traditional form within PLG companies for a while now. So I think one of the sort of dirty secrets that you've exposed, Alexa, is that PLG companies actually do have top-down motions, and most founders aspire to layer a top-down motion onto their PLG foundation within a couple years of starting the company. Actually, I increasingly see this happening earlier than I would think. Certainly there are examples of companies that I was talking to a company the other day that they got to 10 million in ARR and have zero sales, zero top-down motion. It's 100% self-serve, and they kind of want to see if they can keep it that way. But I think most PLG companies are see that actually, and someone put this to me really astutely yesterday, that actually PLG, I think, can be thought of not so much as a revenue generation engine as it is a lead generation engine. So it's a way that you can more rapidly bring people through your funnel so that you can expand the size of these emerging accounts, as opposed to something that's going to be the dominant form of ARR that you have in your business for many years. So I think it's normal for the percentage of revenue at a PLG company coming from self-serve to be high in the early years, but then decline as a percentage over time. So that's all to say that for that reason, when founders are layering on top-down motion, they end up bringing on customer success people. And I think those customer success people look similar to the ones that, have existed for a while. I think one common difference is that because many PLG companies have consumption-based pricing models, these CSMs are often like thinking really actively about, sort of implicitly about revenue, because it's often the adoption that they're driving that drives the pricing model. There's some like adoption related metric in the pricing model. So if you're doing your job as a CSM driving adoption, you're also driving revenue. And for that reason, a lot of CSMs at PLG companies might be responsible for expansion and like in one way or another. And actually one founder I was talking with recently was trying to think through, he was thinking a little bit, I think, more creatively than most, but he was thinking through like, as a PLG company, layering on my top-down motion, do I really even need a sales team? Like maybe I should just have a customer success team. They're driving adoption anyway. That's what drives my revenue. I expect to have a very high net dollar retention company, so like why bother having sales? So that was, I haven't seen that actually exist in a company, but I thought that was like a provocative question. So now so thinking about PLG as a lead gen mechanism. In that part of the customer journey, I think there's now a really interesting additional place for customer success to exist. So like the traditional customer success that exists at PLG companies comes in after the formalization of a corporate level contract. So maybe there were initially a bunch of users that were, paid with a credit card, and sales comes in and says, hey, like actually there are all these benefits to having a corporate level contract, like governance and permissions and these additional features, collaboration, et cetera. So they form a corporate level contract and then hand off the deal to customer success that like makes the company even more successful with the product over time, enables the collaboration, drives expansion. But something that you've written a lot about, Alexa, and I know the community has written a lot about, like even before
good, Judy, we're good.
Okay. Even before the formalization of a corporate level contract, there's an opportunity to drive success for customers, which might be those paid customers that signed up with a credit card and are trying to figure out how to get value. Certainly, like if you can accelerate their adoption and sort of help that massive of initial individual users like present themselves as a product qualified lead, like get so much value that they become a PQL, you can make it faster for like sales to come in and formalize that contract. So, I hear about, for example, like the sales assist role existing to do this, basically like help users adopt the product so that they start to qualify as PQLs. It's like almost like nurturing to get to PQL. But it's something that like maybe we could, I'll let other folks chime in, but like something we could talk about is like, is sales assist really, is that really like what this, certainly that's what these people might be doing from an internal perspective, but like the customer probably sees it as like, I'd like some help, right? Which is what like the term customer success communicates. So anyway, I've been talking for a while. I'll pause there, but lots we can, talk about in terms of like what might be that role of customer success earlier in the journey.
Before I probe, Allison, there were so many good nuggets there. So does anyone have questions or topics that they want to double click on?
Yeah, I'd like to get your opinion of all these touch points with customers in their expansion journey. Because I think sometimes it's confusing to customers. I think that's where you're going with the sales assist. Like I know the account executive, I know the solutions engineer, I know the customer success manager. Now I have a sales assist. And so is there opportunity to go with a more lean approach in working on solving customer problems sooner, which lead to expansion naturally? Kind of a soft way to expand.
Yeah. Like, could you simplify the number of roles so that touch points come from like the same person and it helps the customer faster? Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's a great question. And it's like a perpetual question in the world of working with customers, because like sometimes we achieve lots of benefits through specialization. It's like, you get the person who's most knowledgeable about something to help the customer. The workflows internally for employees, at the vendor might be just easier to understand. It's hard to find people who can do everything, and it's complex for them to manage like a multifaceted workflow. So those are sort of the benefits of specialization. But on the other hand, from a customer standpoint, you really just want to be able to talk to one person and like get all your problems solved. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I do think tactically, and I'd love actually if other folks have different experiences with this, but it feels tactically difficult to have the same person do the sort of user level success or kind of like team level success that needs to be generated before an account becomes really an account, a corporate level contract, to do that and then also serve a customer that has a corporate level contract. It's just like the type of work is really different. Just to give you some examples of like the kind of work that would be done on the sort of user level success side, these are things like, helping individual users adopt the product. So literally like reaching out to a person and saying, hey, I noticed, in my data that you got tripped up when you tried to complete this action. Why don't we hop on the phone and I can help you with that? Or here's like a best practice guide to doing it. Or maybe here's someone else in your organization that figured that out, and because they're also a paid user. It could be things like finding ways to help individual users refer their teammates to the product because maybe there'd be benefits to collaboration. Another activity in this stage might be, getting introductions to leaders or influencers within the organization who can encourage, enable adoption across a group of users. For example, you could imagine if I'm a software company and I know that there are a number of users within a given company that are getting a lot of value from the product, but maybe only 3 of 10 potential users within a team are using it. I could go maybe get an introduction to the manager of that team and say, hey, I'd love to have 10 minutes on your, during the agenda of your weekly meeting to help those 3 users highlight the successes that they've had in their job, with our product and thereby help the other 7 kind of like be more productive. If I'm a manager, I think, wow, these 3 users are like doing well in their day to day. Yeah, but we should help them, help their team members. So like, those are the kinds of things that I think like a user level customer success person can do. Whereas like, post corporate level contract, usually customer success is doing things like quarterly business reviews with executives, aligning stakeholders around an implementation plan, creating a project plan, which is sometimes known as a success plan, to say, okay, we as a vendor are going to do XYZ things and on this time, and you as our customer will do ABC things along this timeline. Like it's so much more kind of like management consultant like in most cases, although not in all cases for sure. So it's just a different role. And it does make me think that like there needs to be a handoff from one form of customer success to another the moment that a corporate level contract, comes into play. But I'd love to hear other points of view. And if people have seen benefits of having like a single point of contact, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, Espen here. Isn't product-led growth kind of moving towards, let's stop with all these stupid quarterly business reviews and meetings we force customers to have. Let's just let them use the product, understand the product themselves, get value from the product. These meetings are forced from the organization and some old school stuff. The future is product-led. Let's not have more meetings. And if everything is product-led, do you then really need the separation anymore? Because I just don't see it, to be honest.
I really appreciate that challenge. And I definitely empathize with the point of view. It feels like a lot of work and overhead. I will say that although I'm totally open to seeing technology solve the following problems in the future, I think there are still problems that are not currently solved by products. For example, the number one cause of churn for corporate level contracts is the executive changing jobs. So the executive signs the contract and then they maybe switch jobs within the organization. So they're no longer responsible for managing the success of that contract, or they move to another company. And we all know actually in this talent environment, turnover is like even higher than it used to be. So like, I got to think, although I haven't seen the data, I got to think that like churn for this reason is even higher now than even a couple of years ago. And the way that you get ahead of that job change is you are closely aligning with those executives. And, I like when I was at Gaines, I was on a texting basis with a number of executives at our clients. And you want to become, friendly enough with them so that if they're thinking about a job change, they might even tell you and like ask for advice and maybe, another company that you could, place them at. So I haven't seen a product solve that problem, although I'd be interested in, if there was one. And I think that is what makes executive business reviews still happening. Now, I would say that there are like some types of corporate level contracts where executive business reviews can be had like far less frequently because they're so sticky at the user level. And I think there are other situations where you might be selling into, for example, like, if you're a dev tools company, like developers and heads of engineering really just like would prefer not to talk to you all that much. So, I think it's less necessary and desirable in those cases, but I still see them happening like all over the place, including at a lot of PLG companies.
I think, go ahead.
I was wondering, you mentioned that there was a healthy balance as revenue grew between sort of self-service revenue and sales assisted or sales led corporate level contracts. Do you have any benchmarks around that? Like, at 10 million in ARR, you should have X, or is it more of a?
Oh my gosh, I wish I did. You could take the lead on that. I would love to see that data. I mean, I mentioned to you, I think a couple, so there's that one company I mentioned, they got to 10 million in ARR entirely self-serve and are only now thinking about like layering and top down. I think actually they might go to like 20 million without it. But then there's, another company I'm close to where, they're like 15 million in ARR and like, 2 million of that or something is from like product led and the rest is top down. And I wouldn't, it's interesting. In that case, like I wouldn't even call the top down necessarily, like it wasn't necessarily like sales assisted in the sense that they were like converting PQLs into or paid users into corporate level contracts. It was more just like they would also just have an outbound effort where they would reach out to companies. I think it would be interesting to look at maybe like the benchmarks in three parts. There's, self-serve revenue, sales assisted revenue, which is, conversion of PQLs to corporate. And then there's just like the sort of more entirely traditional, like top down effort that could be a good distinction.
Yeah. And I'll add, it's a great question. We have some data points around that in our benchmark report that I just posted. I think it really depends on the company. Like Esben, your point around isn't everything product led. I think there are probably a 0.01% of companies that can get away with that. But then there are other companies where you need a little bit of hand holding or solution selling or assisting to get the full value of the product. So my take is, and Allison, tell me if you disagree or if anyone else disagrees, that it totally depends on your company, how technical it is, how much do you need someone to help you to get going, to reach that aha moment, or can you do it all by yourself? And then in order to expand throughout the whole company, that's when a person comes in. And I think it's totally different. Like even a Slack versus an Airtable. Slack is super easy to get going and you probably don't need to talk to a human for a while. But an Airtable, it's easy, but there's so much more value you can get out of it if you have someone guiding you along. Okay, this is how you set it up for the CRM use case. This is how you set it up for the content marketing use case. So in my understanding from talking to companies, that moment to add on when you add a salesperson and the breakdown of self-serve, sales assist, sales led, it really varies based on the complexity of the product. Yeah, Esben, go ahead. I sense a good debate coming, so I'm excited.
No, I agree. So I don't disagree, but what I don't like is the forced meetings, the forced structure. Product-led should lead to just-in-time meetings, just-in-time, not just-in-time communication, not these kind of old-school forced structures where you have quarterly business reviews and, in onboarding is this very forced process because some users don't really want that onboarding. They just want to play with it themselves and go through it, right? And I've been in an experience myself with a popular SaaS tool, which everything was self-service. You could do everything self-service, but we were forced into a structured onboarding process with like 5 meetings, and it was super annoying, right? And I think that's what companies need to learn is like, this whole product-led model leads to like you being able to do it more fit to the user, fit for purpose, not these kind of forced structures with like a lot of meetings. So yeah, just that, I guess that's my take on it. And that's what I'm then saying. Then I don't think you need different functions because it becomes like one function that reacts to different kind of scenarios, and they need to have multiple knowledge levels instead of. I guess my opinion is sales, solution engineering, customer success, already in a sales-led model should have been one function. And with product-led, they even more needs to be one function. And that's, I guess, my bias and where I'm coming from.
No, I like it. I'm curious, Allison, your take. I really think it depends on how big your company is well. And if you, like a Fortune 500 is trying to onboard onto your product, they're probably going to want to talk to someone. So I think it depends on the cycle and the consistency of what the customer wants. And I agree with you that it's starting out with what the customer needs and wants and then following their pattern, but always being a little proactive to make sure that you're always adding value. Allison, I'm super curious about your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I really admire your passion for this. And I think that's the kind of passion that produces amazing products. So like, I'm a little hesitant to be like, no, I disagree with you. Because I really think that instinct is really strong. I think the reality is I haven't seen, like, if you just look at like the most successful PLG companies and you assume they have really smart people who are like good at figuring things out, they have these like old school practices. And so you could say, well, maybe they're just doing it because that's what they were trained to do previously. And maybe they're not thinking about it so much. Maybe they didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So it's always possible we can do better than Airtable, like they're amazing, but like they were of a like earlier, maybe at this point they're of an earlier generation. But I do think probably like statistically, the majority, I'd say over 50% of companies at least will like find some form of like executive alignment to be helpful. I would say like even user-oriented companies often find human interaction to be helpful. As an example, like many of us love Superhuman, right? Like, and they're known to be just obsessive about product market fit. I mean, they sort of like invented the metric for like what is product market fit. And they, their product is incredibly like, it's just wonderful. Like once you learn it, it's really like a seamless part of your workflow. However, Superhuman also became known for having an onboarding call with individual users, which I participated in a few years ago when I first signed up for Superhuman. And I'm sure that onboarding process has improved since then. But I was talking with one of the Superhuman founders the other day, and they still have it. They do it because that half hour when you're on the phone with an onboarding specialist, they found just statistically to be like incredibly impactful for their retention rate. I remember when I was doing it, there was an onboarding specialist on the phone with me. They actually had a UI walkthrough. So, it like the UI walkthrough in their product would say like, now press this shortcut and see what happens. Okay. Like now press that. And it would guide you through like the basic things that you need to know, archiving, replying, sending emails. And then, and the function of the specialist on the phone was to, one, make sure I actually did it, because I don't know about you, but like I'm super busy and like am not sure I will like today prioritize doing a 30-minute training on like shortcuts. Just like takes a ton of motivation to do that. And secondly, she was available in case I had questions. And so they found it to be, not only like lucrative in terms of like generating a high conversion rate and retention rate, but also they're able to afford it because the monthly subscription, the LTV of customers justifies it. So even though this is like a user level interaction, they can have like customer success people like working with individual users. So I'd say if like a product that's as amazing as Superhuman comes, and a company that's as amazing as Superhuman, as product focused as they are, if they come with like human interaction, then there's probably some use for it sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny, Allison. I had a similar experience where I was onboarding onto Superhuman and I was like, oh, I don't want to talk to a human. And then I heard, no, you have to do the onboarding specialist call. Like they're amazing. And I did it. And I just understood Superhuman right away. And they have a little bit of a learning curve. And then when you take the call, you're hooked for life, it feels like.
Yeah. I think it's an example of how behavior change for people is often hard. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's always a group of like visionaries and early adopters of a product that are willing to like go try out something new. But once you get to like the early majority and certainly the later majorities, they need like help changing what they do. Ideally, your product doesn't require much behavior change. Like maybe it kind of taps into learned behaviors that you already have, your normal routines. I think probably that's a sign of product market fit. But, even then, usually there's some measure of behavior change that's required. I'll give another example actually of humans intervening in a very product oriented companies. So that company that I mentioned earlier that got to 10 million in ARR using purely a self-serve motion, I signed up for it, although I'm not a target user. They target developers. So they have like a free trial that lasts for, I think, 30 days. And when you sign up for it, there's an automated email that's sent to you from a customer success manager. That's like what their title is. And it says, hi, saw you signed up. I just wanted to make myself available in case you had questions. You can book time with me here if you want to, no obligation. And then as you know, because I wasn't a target user, I didn't actually use the product. So I feel bad for this company that here I am like messing up their numbers. But then like a couple of days later, they saw I hadn't completed certain actions. So I got another automated email that said, I noticed you didn't activate XYZ. Here's some documentation on how to do that. And then, and then I didn't do it again. It said you only have like X number of days in your free trial up. So it's an example actually of how, well, one, it's an example of like automated, scaled support in a generic sense, but also it's an example of how, you can offer up the human interaction as an option. And, many people, particularly developers, probably won't want it, but some people might. And in that case, you might find it lucrative to offer it.
I love that example. That was great. Alexandra, I know you've had your hand up for a while, so I want to make sure we get to you.
Yeah, thank you for giving it. I just wanted to continue on like topics of meetings, because from a marketer's perspective, I just know that sometimes users need this one human interaction to like be sure about the decision. But yeah, it totally depends on the company, like the number of onboarding meetings and everything. But yeah, my question is, there are so many softwares and solutions now that are like integrated into the product to enhance onboarding and like make product adoption easier. What is your turn on this? Like maybe perspective? What do you think works the best? Maybe my main like question is about maybe courses embedded into the product from let's say standalone academy, and then you just take a piece of content that might be useful for users exactly at this point, for example, like on blog web page or something. Do you think this is something that works, that users are like engaging with, and that can help to enhance like adoption and onboarding?
Yeah, and just to make sure I got it, you're wondering generally about like the category of tools or things that you could embed into the product to communicate with users. Is that right?
There are plenty of those actually. Yeah, but mostly like for education and customer education. So not only like checklists or maybe feature tutorials like these pop-ups that are happening everywhere on the website and you just close all of them, but like a piece of embedded part, like a pop-up also that maybe can, when you roll your mouse over there, or like a sidebar, and you have like a course there, like micro course on some topic or maybe feature or like use case even.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in general, I found those to be particularly helpful for products. I think as a general rule, I think it's important to think of your product as being a tool that you have to change behavior. And so, it's one thing to build into the product, the workflow that you're trying to optimize for a user. But it's another thing to help that user figure out the workflow within your product. And I do think that companies need to take responsibility for it, particularly if they want to be entirely product-led and not have humans intervene. And, that kind of, you could build that yourself, or, you could, as you noted, you could use other providers for it. I think that kind of content might take the form of, as you said, like in-app walkthroughs where you kind of, there are messages that pop up and they might be catered to like where you are in the user journey. Is this your first time logging in? Does it look like you're trying to, explore some kind of use case that we could help you with? What is your role, for example, in which they probably know or could figure out, and do you need a different walkthrough depending on what your role is? I think, embedded courses is really interesting. I don't think I've heard of that specifically, but I like the idea. Recently, I saw a product where they had embedded case studies into their app. So, you would literally log into the app and you could, create certain things. And then on the side panel, it was like, here's how Airtable does it. Here's how Notion does it. And which are other customers of theirs. It's kind of another form of including templates in your product, which, like companies like Airtable and others have done. And certainly like you could source those templates from other customers so that, your users don't have the blank slate problem. They can, work off of what someone else has done.
When you entered the website, you mentioned these use cases. Is it something that pops in your eyes? Like you want to click on it, you want to explore more and like click on the other and see how others are doing it? Or is it just something like another pop-up that you skip?
Oh, like for me personally as a user, I think, yeah, I mean, certainly I think there might be pop-up fatigue in the same way that there's email fatigue. So I think it's important to use them discriminately and particularly to like look at the data that you have on your users to know, like, is this the kind of person perhaps that needs it? Or does this seem like someone who's an early adopter and would prefer just to figure it out? I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Yeah, pretty much. Thank you.
Cool.
Allison, I love the pop-up fatigue. We have a really good question from Robert, if you want to unmute and say it.
For example, we know quite good the customer fit was, but should I engage more maybe with customers where I know they have a fit, but don't have the actual usage to interact with them, or that they convert or should have? Or should I interact more with the customers who have actually the usage? So basically they have customer fit and usage, so great clients and should convert, or where I see they have the fit, but not yet the usage. And the second one is, at which point would you put or layer a low touch on customers on, let's say, MRR basis? For example, our tool is not really expensive for a customer, but let's say one time every 3 months or based on a different action, we can put a person on it.
And your second question was like when to layer on a low touch motion. Yeah. Okay. So on the first question, so like, do you focus on customers who are a good fit and not using, or customers who are a good fit and using because you think they can generate more revenue for you? Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think like ideally you've got a motion for both, right? I mean, you could, because you want to convert signups into activation and revenue, and you want to convert revenue into more revenue. So I think it's important to think of there being like two different parts of the journey, like two different types of conversion that you're looking for. In terms of how you allocate your time, it's probably worth doing some kind of like LTV to cost analysis over time, where like, you run these experiments and you look at, okay, if we complete action X, what kind of LTV lift does that result in? It'd be really interesting actually to like see benchmarks on that as well. But I'm sure it depends a lot on the company. But yeah, I would try to compare apples to apples in terms of LTV to cost. And then on your second question, when do you layer in a low touch communication cadence? Well, I mean, particularly if you, as has been mentioned, like if you want to be like really product led, that would be your bent from the beginning, is like you would start out thinking about like, what are all the scaled ways that I can communicate with users and, help them help themselves. And so, that low touch motion could consist of like really strong documentation. There's one company that I work with, Mux, which is a video API company. They think of their documentation as being a product in itself, which I really appreciate. Like it has a release cadence and an update cadence. It's which is part of the product release cycles. Anytime there's a new feature release, like there's an intensive effort to update the docs. They even have like Easter eggs in their docs to like encourage people to read them. It's something they invest a lot in, and it's not just about technical writers like kind of doing this. Like the product managers and the like developer experience team are taking strong responsibility for it. So that's one. There's certainly, I talked about examples of like an email cadence that you can have, with your customers. We talked about like, in-app communication. Certainly your community can be, an amazing way for folks to help each other. And, community also has other benefits like generating a lot of kind of loyalty to your company and like stickiness to your product as well, ticket deflection. So I'm sure there are other like low touch motions I'm not thinking about right now, but yeah, I mean, I think it's great to start with that. And even if you're hiring, people to help your customers, maybe it's a customer success manager or customer success ops. If you're an early stage company, I'd recommend hiring someone who is a generalist, and in the sense that they can think, from first principles about how to create a scaled journey and like put themselves out of a job, or else like avoid having to hire more people in the future. You really have this critical period in your company. I think always companies should be thinking about how to scale, but I think there's this really critical period in your company where you're something like Series A to B, and you're building all the assets and stuff like along your customer journey. And, the goal is to create repeatable stuff that's ideally embedded in the product, but if not, then embedded in process and other kind of, materials. And if you miss that stage, you'll end up creating a company, potentially it's not scalable, and a product that doesn't do enough to like really support itself.
Hey, just a quick question. If there is any example of a product-led sales tool, like a sales tool that came up bottoms up, how did that happen? Typically what we've seen is like good sales tool have to stick with the CRM. You have to go through a whole buying process. So I was wondering if, you've seen anything in the market that adopted from an end user all the way up to like the VP.
Selling into salespeople specifically.
Yes, selling into salespeople, yes.
Yeah. Dually is a company that I work with that like specifically had that thesis. I as far as I could tell, they've gotten farther than anyone else in that area. But yeah, I mean, the CRM integration that's a tough one. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, such a good conversation. I loved your points around documentation. I loved your points around how you should always give the option for salespeople to say, hey, I'm available for you to reach out, but not be too aggressive with that. And then also all of the conversation around where sales assists or customer success fits in the customer journey. That was a big aha moment for me, where the customer success sales assist version is really user-based earlier on. How do you go from maybe first sign up to activation, and then customer success in the more traditional sense happens later on when there's big, contracts that you're trying to navigate in multiple stakeholders. So I so appreciate this, Allison. It was awesome. And then Allison's newsletter is amazing. So if you want to talk about Allison, your newsletter, or where people could find you to follow along.
Just AllisonPickens.substack.com. Lots of content there. Everything I've written since 2015 and writing, once or twice a week nowadays. So excited to get your feedback on anything that was discussed today. And y'all could feel free to email me as well, AllisonPickens@gmail.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Allison. That was incredible.
Thanks for having me, Alexa. Good to meet you all.
Bye, everyone.